My name is Simon and this is How to Build a Racing Car. This is a race report from the third round of the New South Wales Motor Racing Championship, which was held at the end of April at Sydney Motorsport Park. This round was held on the Brabham Circuit, which I think we use far too rarely. The Brabham section involves a lot of quick changes of direction through a sort of slalom section before you dive down a hill towards a very tight hairpin, which tightens up as you go around it. You then head into another tight corner, which you can really attack since it's kind of uphill. The car has a lot of grip. It's easy to be tempted though to go too hard through the corner, as the exit is at the crest of a hill, so the car sort of starts to wash away from you as you exit the corner. It's a great section in my opinion. It's got a very different character to the rest of the Sydney Motorsport Park track. It had been a busy month in the lead up to this round. I'd planned to put in place quite a large upgrade at the rear of the car. We began by getting a measurement of the car's centre of gravity height. This was mostly to verify some of the assumptions I'd made when I was designing the car. We did this by raising the car onto its side until it was teetering, where the vertical line from the contact point with the ground intersected with the centre plane of the car would be the centre of gravity location. I wasn't brave enough to sit in the car for this test, so I just had to guess my centre of gravity and add it on top. Also quite interesting during this was seeing the floor of the car. It's taken quite a beating. I'll need to replace it sooner than I had planned. From when the car first hit the track, I had an issue with the rear leading arms, whereby the nut retaining the rod ends would become loose during sessions. Not at all ideal. I decided it was most likely caused by the tube deflecting slightly due to the rod end being offset from the axis of the tube. What I wanted to do was make a twofold improvement. I'd put the rod end on axis with a tube, which would prevent the deflection from loosening the nut, and I'd add an adjustment piece which would sit in between the tube and the rod end. This would be tapped with a left-hand thread on the outside and a right-hand thread on the inside. When turned, it would move the rod end in or out, allowing toe to be infinitely adjustable. I was able to purchase the plate material pre-cut based on my previous drawings and cut the tube using the previous cutting template, since the design wasn't changing at the wheel end. At the rear, however, I had to lathe up the tube inserts, which had to be tapped, then lathe up the adjusters, which had to be both tapped and died. I also had to remove and replace the existing leading arm mounts. As the new ones are on axis with the tubes, the arms had to have a straight path to the mounting holes, which necessitated them either being moved out to the side or being moved backwards. I opted to move them backwards. It would be easier to maintain the same toe change with bump that I had before and would make dealing with the stress easier. Essentially, I created a boxed section at the back which would be very strong without adding a huge amount of weight. The second big upgrade was a replacement of the rear rocker with a new one that would allow its movement to be more controlled. Either I'd have the ability to add springs to make its movement stiffer or to lock it down entirely. In the end, I didn't have time to add the spring mounts, but I did add holes to the transmission subframe allowing me to lock it down. This arrangement had the added benefit that it would allow more movement of the rocker before it would bind against the shock absorber, something I should have dealt with better the first time around. One more small change. With the muffler that we added on the dyno, the rain light was now in a position where it could possibly be obscured to a driver directly behind me. We needed to put it in a location where it could be seen from behind at any angle, and the only position left was just below the exhaust. I had parts laser cut to make a new exhaust mount which would allow for this. The previous one had two standoffs which are meant to hold the lower rear bodywork, but as I've not installed this yet and probably won't for a while, I was happy to go this way. As you can see, I was very busy. I barely had a moment to spare in the lead up to the round. The Friday practice, I had to familiarise myself again with the Brabham Circuit and try to find a decent setup. We tried with a locked rear and with a free zero roll rear end and found the car worked better with the rear free. We also tried some different damping setups, but ultimately there was only so much that could be done in the 4 track sessions that were available. I found that I was having an intermittent brake issue. My rear pads would move away from the disc if I went over ripple strips or knocked the car in anyway. I'd usually find out when I hit the brakes for turn 2, get nothing from the rear, and so lock the front brakes immediately. I had to start pumping the brakes along the straight to make sure I'd have them working properly once I got to the braking zone. Overnight we finally did what I'd been meaning to do for a long time. We removed the excess ballast from the car. It had taken so long because it's located in such a difficult to access location. I put it just under the seat to get as low as possible, but that means changing it requires the floor, fuel tank and seat to be removed. It's not ideal, but now I'm at the correct weight, so hopefully I won't need to change this again. Saturday morning then we went into qualifying. I found myself close to Michael in the Stinger, who was similar in speed to myself. In this position, it's possible to work together and improve both drivers' lap times. One driver will go in front onto the straight and provide a tow, punching a hole in the air for the other driver to use to gain speed. They pass the first driver to get a quick lap in. On a fast circuit like Sydney Motorsport Park with its 800 metre long straight, it can easily be worth in excess of half a second. They then alternate. The first driver gets the slipstream and passes the second to get a fast lap in. This isn't what I found happened, however. He ended up passing me using the tow, so I followed him around the circuit. Then as we came onto the straight, I passed him to get a fast lap in, only to have him dive down my inside and pass me. Now we both have slow laps, and we're both having to compromise our laps for the pass. I couldn't see the logic of fighting like this. With some patience, he could get a tow onto the straight and get a faster lap in for himself, so it would be mutually beneficial to cooperate. In any case, we ended up 12th and 13th on the grid for race 1, both probably an easy position behind where we could have been. Race 1, I made a decent start, but honestly I need to take some heat for this one. I was pretty messy. I wasn't comfortable with the car, but I was still making decisions that I shouldn't have, trying to make moves that just weren't there, and I ended up having some pretty close calls. I had a more than close call with my qualifying buddy Michael. I was squeezed maybe a bit too much here and we made contact through turn 3. Luckily no harm was done. To make matters worse, the brake issue I mentioned earlier came back to bite me and I speared off into the dirt in turn 2, undoing what little good I could manage. This wasn't a great one for me. While I did ultimately finish 9th, I really only did because there were 4 DNFs further up the field. Race 2 on Sunday morning was, if anything, even worse than race 1. I was able to have a good fight early on, but my race was compromised by the same brake issue. I had a full spin which dropped me down into the 1200 field. I managed to make up a couple of positions after that and finished 13th. One of these was a spinner. I went off track to avoid him and had my head really shaken around coming back onto the track. I never normally touch these cockpit sides, but I had close to ringing ears after this. Before the last race, a fellow V competitor mentioned he reckoned he knew what was wrong with my rear brakes. He suspected the rear axle nuts weren't tight enough and so the brake disc was moving, displacing the pads. They had been torqued at the start of the year but apparently had become loose, something I didn't anticipate since they have a pin preventing the nut from moving. We tightened them both up and thankfully the brakes gave me no more issues. Between that and finally finding a decent setup with the front dampers, the final race went a lot better. I made a great getaway, sneaking up the inside of several slower cars. I wasn't quite able to pass John into turn 1 but did get by soon afterwards. We had a pack of 5 cars who were all close in speed, so we were able to have a pretty good battle. I was quickly at the head of that pack but wasn't able to break away. The 3 cars behind me got an absolutely monster tow down the straight and flew by me before turn 1. From here I held back. Michael in the blue Stinger and John in the black Jacer were swapping positions, having an exciting battle that ultimately cost them when they both collided coming back onto the main circuit. Whatever tentative and unspoken agreement existed between Gary and I at that point fell apart, as now it was only us left fighting for position. I had no problem getting by him in the corners, but he was always able to get back by me on the straight using the tow. I was hoping to put enough space between us that I'd beat him to the line, but ultimately he got by prior to the finish line. I was glad to have a decent finish to the weekend, because frankly if all 3 races had gone like the first 2 did, I'd have finished pretty dissatisfied with myself. Anyway, that was it for the 3rd round of the state championship. It's probably been my most difficult round. I made far too many mistakes and had too many issues with the car to be that happy with it, but it taught me a lot and hopefully I'll be a lot stronger next round. There were some small improvements to the car, but I didn't really get the breakthrough that I was hoping for with my improvements. I won't be able to get too much done over the next month either with some other things I've got going on, but I've got a few ideas that I'll try and get onto the car before then. The next round is back here at Sydney Motorsport Park, but back on the normal Gardner circuit at the end of May. It'll be the halfway point of the season. I'm struggling to believe that it's already been 4 rounds since the start of the year. The time's just flown by. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed watching this. I'll see you on the next one.